It was an evening unlike any other at the modest church fellowship hall in Shreveport, Louisiana. The space, normally alive with the warm chatter of Sunday potlucks and the quiet devotion of Bible studies, had been transformed into a crowded town hall, buzzing with a nervous energy that hinted at something extraordinary. Rows of folding chairs, polished to a soft gleam, were arranged in a semicircle around a modest stage. The room smelled faintly of old wood and incense, and every creak of a chair added to the anticipation that hung in the air. On this particular night, the hall was filled with families, retirees, and local residents, all eager to hear what the guest speaker might say. At the front of the room, under a simple spotlight, stood Donald Trump. His presence was unmistakable. The iconic orange tint of his complexion, the precise gestures of his hands, and his authoritative posture had become familiar to millions. Yet tonight, he appeared uncharacteristically subdued, as if the gravity of the occasion had stripped away some of his usual bravado. His voice, when he began speaking, carried a measured tone that contrasted sharply with the bombast of his past rallies. For much of the evening, Trump spoke on his usual topics: policies, achievements, and visions for America's future. His words were delivered with the cadence of a seasoned orator, yet there was an undercurrent of introspection in his speech that few had anticipated. Between carefully chosen pauses, he allowed the weight of his own words to settle over the audience. It was clear that beneath the surface of political rhetoric, something deeply personal was stirring. Amid the attentive faces in the crowd, one figure stood out, not for the grandeur of her presence, but for the quiet intensity that radiated from her. 8-year-old Lily, dressed in her best Sunday dress and clutching an old leather-bound Bible passed down from her late grandmother, sat near the front. Her small frame, though fragile, exuded a determined strength. Earlier that day, her mother had whispered encouragement to her. "You can ask him, but only if you're brave enough and if you truly mean it." And brave as she was, Lily had spent weeks rehearsing her question in a little notebook, carefully writing it over and over until the words became as natural as breathing. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere in the hall shifted. The routine applause and polite nods that had greeted Trump's prepared remarks began to dwindle. When a moderator finally opened the floor for questions, adults quickly formed a line, eager to ask about local issues, national policies, and even compliments about his signature red tie. Yet, in that seemingly endless line, a small, determined figure began to move forward. With each step, the murmur of conversations dimmed, and soon all eyes were fixed on the tiny girl advancing toward the podium. Lily's heart pounded in her chest as she approached the microphone, her small hands gripping the edges of her beloved Bible so tightly that her knuckles turned white. When her turn came, the room fell into an almost tangible silence. Donald Trump looked down at her, his eyes softening for a moment as if he recognized something disarming in her vulnerability. "And what's your question, young lady?" he asked, his voice unusually gentle, a stark departure from the rapid-fire retorts he was known for. Taking a deep breath, Lily's voice, though trembling, rang clear. "Mr. Trump, what does God mean to you?" In that single, simple question, the entire hall seemed to pause. The question was so unadorned by rhetoric, so purely heartfelt, that it cut through the political posturing like a beam of sunlight through dark clouds. For a long, breathless moment, no one spoke. The stained glass windows cast kaleidoscopic patterns across the room, and even the sound of shuffling chairs seemed to fade into the background as every eye fixed on Trump. For what felt like an eternity, Trump remained silent, his gaze locked on Lily and the precious Bible in her arms. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, his expression softened further. The hard lines of his face seemed to relax, and the usual gleam of self-assurance gave way to something deeper, vulnerability, perhaps regret. "That's a big question," he finally said in a low, reflective tone. "It's not one I've always had a clear answer to." The audience, composed mostly of skeptical but curious locals, leaned forward. In that charged silence, Trump began to share a story that no one had expected. "When I was about your age," he started, his voice quavering slightly. I used to sit in church every Sunday, staring at the stained glass windows, wondering if God was really listening. I had many questions about why things happened, about why I felt so alone at times. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in, while the soft lighting danced over his features, revealing a man grappling with memories long buried beneath the persona of a politician. His tone shifted, becoming more personal, almost confessional. My father used to tell me that faith is like climbing a ladder, one step at a time. But sometimes when you're climbing, you're so scared you might fall that you stop believing. I was angry then, angry at a world that didn't seem fair, angry at a God who I thought had abandoned me. The admission was raw, unexpected, and it rippled through the room like a secret revealed. As Trump continued, his voice grew steadier. But over the years, I've come to understand that faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about believing that even when you can't see the whole picture, there's a purpose, a reason to keep moving forward. Lily's eyes widened as she listened intently. Her question, simple yet profound, had unlocked a torrent of emotion in a man known for his unyielding confidence. Around them, the mood in the hall transformed. What began as a routine town hall evolved into a deeply personal conversation about loss, redemption, and the power of belief. People who had come expecting polished political slogans were now part of a shared moment of introspection. As Trump recounted a memory of his late brother Fred, a man described as kind and genuine, he spoke of a time when grief and anger nearly crushed his spirit. "I was devastated when Fred passed away," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I questioned everything. Why did someone so good have to leave this world so soon? In those dark moments, I even wondered if I could continue if I was alone in my struggle." His confession resonated with the crowd, many of whom had faced their own trials and losses. But then he continued, his tone rising with quiet determination. "I realized that faith isn't about perfection or knowing every answer. It's about trusting that even when life seems unbearable, there's a light somewhere that guides you." The hall was completely still now, each person absorbed in their own reflection. Even the sound of distant traffic outside seemed to fade away as Trump's words took center stage. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes meeting Lily's with an intensity that belied his public image. "Lily, your question reminds me that sometimes the simplest inquiries are the most profound. They force us to confront our deepest doubts and, in doing so, inspire us to find our way out of the darkness." A ripple of soft applause began to build, a spontaneous, heartfelt response that swept through the room like a warm tide. Lily's small face, streaked with tears that now flowed freely, shone with a mix of sorrow and pride. Her mother, who had been watching silently from the front row, reached over and squeezed her hand, a silent gesture of support that conveyed more than words ever could. As the applause subsided, a man in the back, an older gentleman with a weathered, kind face, stood slowly. "Mr. Trump," he said, his voice measured and sincere, "I've spent years trying to understand my own faith, and your words tonight have given me hope. I believe we're all struggling in our own ways. Do you really think that even in our darkest moments, there's a reason to keep climbing?" Trump paused again, his eyes flickering with the memories of past pain and hard-won lessons. "I do," he replied quietly. "Our struggles, our doubts, they remind us that we're not meant to stand still. Faith is the courage to continue, even when the answers seem out of reach." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd, and the atmosphere in the hall shifted from one of solemn introspection to a shared, collective resilience. People exchanged looks of quiet understanding, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the hall's lighting. In that moment, the town hall had transformed from a stage for political debate into a sanctuary of hope and healing. For several more minutes, Trump spoke of faith as a journey, one that was messy and complicated, yet filled with moments of unexpected beauty. He recalled the advice his father had given him about climbing a ladder, the gentle reassurances from a beloved brother, and the realization that sometimes it's the unanswered questions that lead us to the greatest truths. Faith, he said, is not about having every answer. It's about believing that there's something more, something that lifts us up even when we feel we can't go on. Lily listened, her eyes reflecting a wisdom far beyond her years. Her question had not only silenced the room, but had opened a window into a conversation that bridged generations and differences. As Trump concluded his heartfelt story, he turned his attention back to the audience, his voice firm yet tender. "Remember," he said, "that no matter how lost or alone you feel, there's always a reason to keep climbing. Even when the ladder shakes, keep reaching for the next step." The hall erupted in applause once more, gentle, sustained, and filled with genuine emotion. Strangers embraced briefly, and soft tears glistened in the eyes of many. In that shared moment of vulnerability, the barriers between politician and citizen, skeptic and believer, seemed to crumble. After the meeting, as people began to file out of the fellowship hall, conversations sparked quietly among those who had been moved by the event. In hushed tones, they discussed what faith meant to them, how loss and hope intertwined, and how one simple question could change everything. Lily, still holding her grandmother's worn Bible close to her heart, walked slowly beside her mother, who whispered words of comfort and pride. The little girl's bravery had not only touched Donald Trump, but had awakened something deep within everyone present. A reminder that sometimes the most profound truths are found in the simplest of questions. Later that night, as the town hall emptied and the cool Louisiana air settled over Shreveport, many people carried the memory of that evening with them. For some, it was a call to re-examine their own beliefs. For others, it was a reminder that vulnerability and honesty could bridge even the widest divides. And for Lily, that night marked the beginning of a journey in which her small but courageous question would forever serve as a beacon of hope, inspiring others to ask their own hard questions and to search for meaning in a world that often seemed overwhelming. In the days and weeks that followed, the story spread quietly at first, then with growing momentum. Local newspapers, followed by national outlets, recounted the night. An 8-year-old sincere inquiry led a high-profile figure to share his deepest doubts and redemption. Social media buzzed with reflections and shared stories of personal struggle, as people from all walks of life found solace and inspiration in the event. Teachers discussed it in classrooms, community leaders referenced it in meetings, and families found a renewed sense of togetherness, united by the idea that even in moments of uncertainty, hope could be kindled. For Donald Trump, that night became more than just a public speaking engagement. It was a turning point, a moment of personal reckoning. Though his career had been built on confidence and a relentless pursuit of power, his heartfelt admission about faith and loss resonated with many. It was a reminder that beneath the polished surface of political rhetoric lay the universal human experience of doubt, pain, and ultimately, redemption. As the months passed, the memory of that town hall continued to influence conversations about faith, public life, and the importance of asking hard questions. And for Lily, her simple question, spoken with the innocence of an 8-year-old and the weight of a lifetime of wonder, became a symbol of the power of truth. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful voices come from the smallest hearts, and that even in the midst of chaos and doubt, a single question can light the way toward hope.